Welcome. I'm Mary Long, the founder of Herstory Network. Today on Unspeakable Things, we have one of our favorite guests, Pastor Siri Strommen. She is the pastor at Atonement Lutheran Church in Bloomington, Minnesota. And she is here, as always, for us to figure out why we're here, what spirituality actually is, and the answer to all these questions we have. We're going to figure it all out.
Hi, that's Siri. Right.
Thanks for joining us. Okay, so I was thinking about our talk today. And what I've been thinking about lately is the teachings of sacrifice and suffering. Now, for those of you tuning in for the first time, Siri, as I said, is a Lutheran pastor, not conventional, very, or I don't know, I'm not Lutheran. Maybe for Lutherans it is, but certainly for Catholics, I think she'd be excommunicated, to be honest, because the things about are wonderful, but not really. They don't really fall within the teachings of the religion I grew up in. I was very Catholic for a long, long time, and really, I guess I would say walked away from religion in my mid-30s, not for any other reason except it wasn't answering the questions I had anymore. And my heart led me to explore other things. And what that led me to believe is I don't want to follow any religion. My spirituality is the most important thing in my life to me. Since I've been little, I wanted to know, why are we here? I have felt a connection to something divine, something bigger than us. I've always known it's out there, but I followed within the confines of Catholicism because that's what everybody in my northwest side of Chicago neighborhood did. The Irish Catholics mostly. And anyway, it didn't work for me anymore. And I apologize in advance because I sometimes can get I hurt people's feelings sometimes. I'm too dismissive of their beliefs. And I want to say I do that a lot. I try and catch myself. I don't believe this stuff anymore. I get really upset about it, but I want to be respectful of other people's beliefs, which is why Siri is a very nice buffer, because she is very respectful of other people's beliefs. And I want to be. I just sometimes don't think before I speak. So if I do that, I apologize in advance. I feel passionately about this. The interesting thing to me is that people who are very religious think I'm like a heretic or this horrible person I do not believe in the traditional God. I don't, but I absolutely believe in some kind of divine intelligence that is beyond anything I could ever describe.
Yes.
So I do want to say that. So the sacrifice and suffering part, this is something, it's amazing to me how programmed we are with our beliefs, especially religious beliefs, because I honestly, it's been quite a few years since I was in my mid-30s and have explored all these other ways of being spiritual in this world. But there's still that programming that sacrifice and suffering has some kind of inherent value, and that there is some kind of entity that applauds it and will reward me. That's what we're taught, your rewards in heaven. Yep. I think it's very interesting that the people who preach that our reward is in heaven, that we are meant to suffer and sacrifice here, those people aren't suffering and sacrificing. My religion, they own a town, they own a bank, they own precious art. They're billionaires. They're not suffering and sacrificing till they get to heaven. But all of us parishioners, all the people in the flock are all told to. And I think you find that in most religions, even the televangelists, God applauds your suffering. You're a holy person, while they get in their jet to go on vacation. So I do have very strong feelings about this. I don't believe it, but I still have a hard time letting go of the belief that life can actually, and is meant to be, very joyous, very light, very happy. Why do we feel like we're doing something wrong if we're super happy and life's going too well for us?
Right. Oh, there's so much to unpack there. There's really a lot. And I was sort of thinking about this earlier today. And We can try to piece some of these pieces out. But one of the things I think we get confused about in religion is the difference between descriptive and prescriptive. Descriptive means you're describing something you can see. Prescriptive means you're prescribing, this is the only way it has to be. And I think a lot in specifically the Bible has been considered to be prescriptive when it's really descriptive. And I think suffering is a really great example of that, where people universally have noticed that when they've gone through periods of suffering, it's helped them to see things differently and mature. And that not always, but there are times in which we go through rough times that forces us to look at things in our life and can challenge our ego, that kind of false self that's trying to help us get through life, but isn't very mature. It comes into conflict where our ego thinks it has everything figured out and it's moving us along. And then something happens and all of a sudden our ego falls apart, and, you know, we're rebuilding. And so people have noticed that in moments of suffering, there's the possibility, not the insurance, but the possibility that we can grow and mature a little bit. And so I think that's one reason why so many different religions have talked about that, but it doesn't have to be that way. And we don't need to glorify suffering. And you certainly can go through a period of suffering and become a worse person. You can become even more hardened, and you can be like, well, now I hate everyone and everything. Well, so clearly that didn't work. I think about like the story where Jesus goes out in the wilderness for 40 days. And I love this story because he's about to go start his ministry. And I think he was the kind of person who was so self-aware. He knew there might still be stuff in him that could get triggered. You know, people's opinions about him, how he can use his power and intelligence and just stuff. He had to face it. So I wouldn't say that he was intentionally looking for suffering. I think what he was doing is putting himself in a position where he couldn't run away from himself, and he had to look himself in the eye. And that's what the temptations were. It was bringing out anything left in him that was going to derail his ministry. Was he suffering on purpose? I don't think you'd necessarily say that. I think he was just doing something that he thought was going to help him to be more self-aware. But we can become self-aware without suffering. So there's nothing inherently holy about suffering. And you're absolutely right that it is often the people in power who are doing just fine who seem to be the ones telling people who are already suffering, you know, you're good, you're fine, or you just have to pray harder, or don't worry, God will give you platitudes and stuff like that don't actually help you, that don't actually like work for you or change your circumstance or empower you. So those things really can be used against people who are already marginalized and oppressed. That's my one first answer about suffering is you don't have to become more self-aware and a better person through suffering. And sometimes it doesn't actually even work.
True. I think one of the biggest questions, because honestly, for the past 20 years or so, since my mid-30s, I have asked a lot of questions about this faith that I was so grounded in. And one of the questions that I think is important to ask is, who is benefiting from my suffering?
Exactly.
First of all, if there is a God that, and this is what religion teaches, a God that created me, but I'm born with an original sin because Eve, of course, a female, ate an apple she wasn't supposed to eat. I mean, this God is so petty, so petty.
Totally.
Eats this apple, and now everyone for the rest of our human lineage is born with this original sin we have to overcome and sacrifice. And one thing that's important is we all suffer at some points. Life can be very hard. I had, up until 2 years ago, I had a decade of just nonstop losses, suffering, dying, trauma. there was just a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ask for it unless you're of the belief system that before we're born, we plan things out for the evolution of our soul. So maybe I did. I kind of think that could possibly be true, but I didn't seek it out. It was things that were happening that actually, in retrospect, were phenomenal for the evolution of my soul, for my own growth as a woman, as a human being, for releasing a lot of trauma I was carrying around. I never, ever want to go through it again, but I am very grateful that I went through it. What I think the difference is, and especially for females, is we are so applauded for our martyrdom, for
Yeah.
our sacrificing.
There
And
you go.
I've come to believe there is no God that applauds that or wants that or needs that or looks on that favorably.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think the only person voluntary suffering benefits is you and the person you're doing the suffering for. I think whatever is the divine intelligence of this universe is indifferent to it and probably would prefer you didn't put yourself through that kind of suffering when it's unnecessary. But I do think this is one of the things women really get applauded for is their martyrdom, their suffering. When you see these big giant athletes, they win the Super Bowl or whatever it is, and they're like, I just want to thank my mom. She never thought of herself. She gave up
Yeah.
everything for us. And that is like, and I see it with my relatives with posts on Facebook. Happy birthday, mom. You're the greatest mother ever. You take care of everyone. You never think of yourself. And that is the suffering, the martyrdom that women have taken on as our cloak, as our holiness. And I'm telling you, I wore that cloak for most of my life. And it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing when I think of how I fostered situations where I could not overtly, but covertly and even subconsciously martyr myself because I thought, first of all, this is hard to admit, but I think it gives us a bit of spiritual superiority.
Oh yeah.
I
Oh
am
yeah.
I am willing to do this for you.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't this wonderful? Because there's a God that thinks I'm better or will shine his light brighter on me and his for sure in religion
Mm-hmm.
because of this. And I think this is so ingrained in it's not just religion, it's societal. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's our roles that we're taught that sacrificing ourselves for our families is almost the highest honor you can aspire to as a
Mm-hmm.
female
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, maybe not as overtly but definitely covertly. And I think that makes it very hard. How many times, Siri, when you're out with girlfriends or something, are they like, oh, I feel so bad. My kid wanted me to do this, but I really needed this night out or
I
whatever
know.
it is. There's always that guilt whenever we do something for ourselves.
Yep. Oh yeah, totally. And as you're talking, even though my whole life I have been a huge independent person and very, very feminist in my own ways, um, and have always really had my own projects, my own things going on that have been really important to me. As you were talking about this, it's still bringing up the ingrainedness that's in me. If I'm honest, I do feel good when I'm at times when I'm giving and giving and giving and giving. And it's sneaky how it shows up because for me, it may not be in traditional female roles. It may be in more traditional masculine roles because I have a job as a pastor and I work at a church, but it gets in there. Workaholism can be one way. There's how much time you're spending with your kids and doing it all and doing the laundry, and then you feel like a martyr, and it gives you an internal boost. I think psychology is so great right now in that it's teaching us what certain behaviors and mindsets are genuinely unhealthy and don't lead to good places, and that can be a huge revelation for what we've been potentially holding up in religion that's been really unhelpful. talking about codependency, where you are enabling somebody else's bad behavior, but you're praised for it and you're considered the good wife, the good mother, the good whatever. When I went through seminary, it was drilled into me that you had to take care of yourself, because pastors, when they don't take care of themselves, can end up losing it. And there would be examples of pastors having an affair with the organist or the secretary, or, and blowing up their family just because they're not in a good place. There are so many different examples. And so it was drilled into me. You need to take your days off. You need to take your time off, because it used to be thought that church is the same as God. You're serving God, so you're serving the church. It's the same. So you give everything, you give everything, you give everything. And
don't you think that's kind of still true though? Church is serving God. I think it is in my religion.
It's definitely, I think, equated, and I think it's very dangerous. And that's something that I've really learned within myself, is to say, no, my first commitment is to God. And that's not necessarily to the church. Like, that's actually fourth down on my list. It's like, I'm responsible for myself, and I'm here to work with partnership with God. And that may or may not be in the church. But that sense of being even in a victim mentality too, that's another piece there, when we're sacrificing all the time and we feel like we're a martyr and we're giving it. It's this whole.
Hold on, Siri. Sorry, this is okay. We got a ton of notices about this.
Oh yeah.
Emergency broadcast. My phone's off, but it still went on. Yours didn't make that noise.
It's probably downstairs.
Oh, smart girl. I use it to watch the time. So
yeah,
pardon the interruption. That everybody just experienced that at the same time. It was
emergency. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. I'm just trying to pick up, but there is sort of a holiness to allowing yourself to be a victim of things, and to kind of give and give and give. And there is, like you said, a sense of spiritual superiority. And at the worst, we equate that with what Jesus did on the cross. That is the problem. Is if you try to argue with the idea of self-care, and you're trying to say, look, we got to be healthy, we got to have healthier boundaries, I deserve to thrive, I deserve to live. And then they go, well, yeah, but what about Jesus? And it's baloney, because we decided as a church, or I should say the guys got together and decided what the cross meant, and decided that what it meant was that Jesus was this victim who chose this suffering to save all of humanity. It's only one particular interpretation of this event that people thought was crazy. It could have been interpreted, and has been interpreted, in completely different ways that are actually empowering to what Jesus was doing, and much more metaphorical, rather than, if you're a good Christian, especially a good woman, you need to just sacrifice yourself as a victim like Jesus did. I could go on and on.
No, I understand what you're saying. And I think this is a really important point. Here's what I believe. And again, these are my beliefs. I have a lot of questions. And here's one of my questions that I've asked over the years, because like I said, I followed the doctrine. I taught CCD. I went to church every single day. I was very, very invested in my religion, but I started asking questions. And one of the questions was what you just said about the crucifixion of Jesus. So we're taught that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son to be sacrificed that we might have life and have it more abundantly. Now, think about this teaching. We just accept all this stuff without really thinking about it. So we're taught like God is our father, right? And we are his children. So what we're supposed to believe is that this father sent one of his children to be absolutely tortured and slaughtered for the rest of us. That to me is ridiculous.
Doesn't make any
What
sense.
kind of psychotic God is that?
Yep.
I believe that's more convenient than saying this amazing enlightened being walked among us and tried to tell us about self-responsibility, owning our words and actions, creating worlds with our thoughts and words. He said, greater things than I have done, you will do. He tried to teach us, and we were like, nah, we like the old way. We don't want to take responsibility for our lives, our thoughts, words, and actions, and what we create. We want to leave that up to that daddy God in the sky. And so you're from the devil. You're saying stuff opposite to what we've been trained to believe is true. So now we have to kill you. But instead of taking responsibility for that, we will also blame this on the God in the sky that preordained that all this should happen. And this really also plays into, people are like, why does God allow this? Why are there hungry children? Why would he allow that? Well, first of all, he always God the he. We're the ones that are here doing these things. We're the ones that are ignoring the poor and letting children starve and promoting violence by what we watch, or the games we play or whatever. We're the ones fostering all this. Stop blaming God for what we are doing. And that's hard. You have to take responsibility for your own choices. And that's probably been one of the hardest things. And in my evolution of growth, not that I'm anywhere near done, but certainly after these 10 years in the desert, I don't know who named it a dark night of the soul, but I wish it was a night, because it was a decade for me. It was truly a decade. But anyway, what was I saying about
Well,
I was prophesizing, which is out of my comfort zone. And so it was time for me to be quiet. I'll let you go.
No, I want to jump on exactly what you said, because you're exactly right. When you think about the implications of the traditional story as we've been taught it, it is disturbing. And it is not anti-Bible or anti-Christian for me to say that, because that particular theology that you named about God needed Jesus to die, that didn't come for 100 years, several hundred years after the Bible was even written. That's medieval understanding. It comes in a completely different culture and time. We don't think the same way that people in the medieval or even biblical times think. We don't. As human beings, we have different mindset and different ways of looking at things. That made sense in that time frame, but theologians have criticized that for hundreds of years, and yet it remains dominant, because I believe it promotes a very authoritarian and vengeful God of, well, if you don't do this, you're going to hell, and if you do this, you're going to heaven. And that is simple, and it's easy, and it works really well if you are trying to have control over a lot of people. That's not the only way to see it. You're exactly right. We had this beautiful human being who wanted to show us how to live out of our hearts. That's how I see it. He wanted to show us how to live in a way that comes from complete empathy, and change how the world works. And that was threatening. And so he was killed, and he was so courageous. I love this. He was not even going to let, he wasn't going to let anybody affect who he was. So no one had the power over him. Even when he's dying, he didn't hate them. To me, that's one of the most powerful parts of the whole story, is when Jesus says, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. They're insane. But I'm not insane. I'm not insane.
True. He said, you have only the power over me I give you.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot.
Exactly. So he could have chosen not to suffer, but he said, you know what, this is going to happen. It's inevitable. But I'm making the choice to do this. I'm claiming my own agency to go through with this. But in the process of me choosing to go through this, you have no power over me. You have no power to ultimately change how I feel and who I am. In the worst situation, this is Jesus talking, that I can find myself, I can still be a person who operates out of love. Therefore, you've lost. I've won. And then, so all of the hatred, all the anger, all like the worst of humanity gets thrown at him. And he's still showing that you can live out of love. And then my thought is, whatever the resurrection was just sort of saying, at the end of the day, evil's going to lose. Anger is going to lose. Violence is going to completely capitulate and like eat itself out, eat itself. And, and all that will be left is love.
That would be quite a trick.
It would be. It would be. And I think that's what's so important is the message there to me is when we're done with all our bullshit, when we're done with all our fighting and our yelling and our power and our I'm more important than you and you're this, when that all dies away and it gets exhausted with its own bullcrap, what's left is love. And that's the whole story. So going back to like suffering, I think about how much suffering I've gone in my life that was needless, didn't need to happen because I wouldn't stand up and do what deep inside Siri knew I could do. I was in a marriage that I stayed in way too long, but I was martyring myself. I was a pastor. I was a good Christian. No one got divorced in my family. I kept taking self-help classes and reading books and going to therapy. And my goodness, I was going to fix this marriage. And in the process, I felt like I was constantly carrying a weight on my chest that got heavier and heavier and heavier until one day I just couldn't do it anymore. And I even prayed. I prayed and I prayed and I said, God, tell me what to do. Help me through this. Help repair my marriage. And I heard nothing. I heard silence. And it wasn't until I made the decision finally to love myself enough that I didn't have to suffer, that I heard God's voice saying, this is why we were quiet, because if I would have told you what you needed to do, you wouldn't have believed me. You weren't ready to hear it. I had to like hit bottom myself in order to listen to what I knew deep inside, which was that was killing me. And I'm not saying he was a bad guy. I'm not even going to go into the details. I'm just saying I tried my ass off for 16 years and it didn't work. And it was never going to get better. And in the end, I realized to love myself, to allow myself to find love and to allow him to find someone who loved him was a mercy. And that's where God was. I believe that like when I decided to get married, God was like, all right, let's do this. I don't think it's a good fit, but I'm going to be with you and try to help you out. But you're two young kids. What the hell do you know? What the hell do any of us know? And then when I got to the point where my suffering was too great, God says, okay, I don't need you to suffer. Are you crazy? There's a whole rest of your life to live. And now in me taking more and more ownership of my life and more responsibility for who I want to be and what I want to do, I'm a better person. And I think it makes everyone else around me better too, because I'm full of life and energy and love and happiness. 9 billion people on the planet suffering is hell. Why would that be holy?
It's interesting because, I often joke that so many marriages I see, especially in my family, seem more like endurance tests than,
yes.
I mean, I know it's like a calling card, like we've been married this long. We're miserable as hell.
Yeah.
But everyone applauds them. God bless you.
I know.
Again, it plays into the suffering, sacrifice. That's what this life is for, which really, when you stop and look at it, why would this loving, generous, abundant being create us to be here and suffer and sacrifice? It makes no sense. That is someone's personal agenda that they wrapped up in a special book and organizations, and it has nothing to do, in my opinion, always my opinion, why exactly we are on this planet. And, you bring up the marriage thing. And I think a lot of women are in this. I can tell you, with a couple exceptions, every relationship, marriage, whatever it was that I had was, oh, he needs me. It's my duty to love him back to life. He's so damaged. I'm here not to love and be loved and enjoy this life, but to sacrifice my life for other people. I got in a discussion a month or so ago. This man said, the feminist movement is the worst thing that ever happened to families and marriage. 70% of divorces are instigated by women. Yes. And I said, it's interesting that you see that as some kind of failing on women's part, as opposed to, is it possible that the fact that we train our boys to bury all their emotions from the time they're very small, suck it up, don't act like a little girl, get tough, and to dominate women, to lead them, that's their job. Like that, maybe that isn't working anymore, that maybe females have evolved to a point where, unlike our mothers and grandmothers, we feel we can voice how we're feeling inside, and we actually have the option of moving. The system isn't exactly set up to support us very well, but much better, at least we can get it done, whereas our mothers and grandmothers couldn't do that. But I found that very interesting, that the fact that we are instigating divorces, is there nothing that won't be laid at women's feet? Everything that happens, we bring on our own assaults. Our marriages fail because of us, and it's bullshit. It is bullshit. We really need to start asking questions about the role that we play, the role we're told to play, and are we really comfortable? Is this really who we want to be? Is this bringing out our joy, our soul, our spirit? Or are we just trotting through, waiting for that big reward in the sky that we get after we die? It makes no sense.
I agree. And I think by glorifying suffering, we are sort of baptizing unnecessary situations with the promise and hope of heaven, instead of saying, no, this world can be so much better. This life can be so much better. I'm in a new marriage now, and, they say no marriage is perfect. Well, for 16 years, I beat myself over the head with that phrase by saying, well, no marriage is perfect. But I'll tell you what, some are worth it and some are not. So some you're sacrificing yourself at an altar that no one else really cares about. And some, at the end of the day, it matters and it works, and you're glad for it. And that's completely different. To somehow assume that every marriage is the same is abusive.
Yeah.
There are good marriages and there are bad marriages, and good marriages, they all take work, but at the end of the day, you get something back. And so again, just to use that example, I stayed way too long in so many of my relationships because I did not give myself permission to really look at what was happening inside myself. I was in one relationship in high school where he was incredibly controlling, or college rather. He was incredibly controlling, didn't want me to see my friends, didn't want me to see my family. Lucky I didn't marry him, but I stayed way too long in that relationship because I wasn't willing to listen to the hurt in me and say, I don't need to feel this way. And I'm going to be the bad guy here and break up with you. And I don't care what you think of me. I wasn't ready to own that. So I guess what I'm saying is, so much of the suffering we have isn't caused by God and isn't wanted by God. It's allowed because we want it. We need it. We bring it on. And when we're sick of it, when we're done with it, God's ready to say, I'm going to help you let that go. I'm going to help you let that go. Let's walk away. Let's do this. Let's do that. I'm ready. If you're ready, I'm ready.
I think the hardest thing for me was coming. I wasn't in a marriage, but it was even in I have a big family, my relationship with my family, the role I played. And a few years ago, when I first started being aware of this unnecessary sacrifice, suffering, martyr role that I was playing, which I thought was sacred, was completely unnecessary. that was really hard because I felt like I wasted my life.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was like, oh my God. It was kind of like a process when I first started, and this is for me, again, how it worked. Maybe not for everybody, but as you spend more time in meditation and quiet in asking these questions, answers start arising. And very often they're way different than we thought they would be. But I love that because that tells me it's coming from some place, a deeper source than my usual habitual answers to things or whatever. But the first stage, first of all, it was uncomfortable because and even everywhere you look around you, everything is sacrifice, suffering. Just do it. I mean, whatever it is, nothing comes easy. That's why they call it
Right.
work. You
Yeah.
got to earn it.
Hustle.
Yes. So
Yeah.
we're taught. And then especially as women, we're definitely taught to be martyrs, to sacrifice ourselves. That's our highest calling. So the first thing I felt was complete despair. I was like, first I thought this can't be right. Like, it feels selfish or something. Maybe I'm just like really selfish and I don't want to sacrifice myself anymore. And honestly, it's what I was saying about these old teachings are so ingrained. Even now it'll come up and it'll be like, there's no value in that. If you want to give it value, Mary, you can give it value, but there's no God in the sky that's going to value you working your ass off on this or you doing this for someone else that they should be doing themselves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was the first stage, right? And then I was so sad. I was really, really sad that I just felt like, what's the point? All this stuff has already happened. I've been married. I've had my kids. They're grown. I've made all these choices in the complete dark, in a room that I thought was flooded with light, and I was mistaken. I was mistaken. I thought I had the answers, and I was completely lost and just following what I was told was true. So, and I'm not going to lie, sometimes that still comes up. I just go, all that time, all those things I did, I volunteered for suffering because it was my comfort zone. That's the danger, is that
Yeah.
suffering and sacrifice can become your comfort zone, especially for women. And
Yeah.
so to make a choice for ourselves, or that maybe somebody else won't like, or may cause them suffering, even though it's the righteous choice, is very uncomfortable for us, which is why we need the support of each other. And we need to talk about these kind of things so that we can say, yes, the tide is turning. Yes, we are walking away from these the old doctrine
Old
and
ways.
about
Yeah.
who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to behave. But it's scary. So let's hold each other's hand. You can do it. You can do it. And we need to examine it. One thing that really bothers me, and I love quotes and all that kind of stuff, when people throw out all that stuff and, oh, this is a great song, but it doesn't really do anything until we really dig in there and unravel what's driving our engine. And I have a habit of saying extremes, never always they all or whatever. But I'm going to say, I think the vast majority of women have that deep seated. And if you're one of those women saying, not me, just think about it a little bit. Cause I know women that a lot of them like, oh, not me. I don't let anyone push me around. But I watch them and I think, you're kind of kidding yourself, because you really are falling into a type. And I think that's a danger we all fall into, is this is my comfort zone. This feels uncomfortable. When you start choosing yourself, saying yes to yourself, and realizing, I wasn't put on this planet to sacrifice myself for other people, to do for them the things that they should be doing for themselves. And I don't just mean their laundry or doing their dishes. I mean their inner work, their healing work, the work that will help them grow. That I'm not supposed to be doing that for them, that it's okay for me to make these choices for myself. It's really uncomfortable because I have so ingrained what normal is to me. And normal is to me, Mary is the martyr. Mary is the one who sacrifices. It's embarrassing as hell. When I first realized that, oh my God, I wanted to crawl in a hole. I was like, this is me.
That's such an important thing that you said. Our comfort zones that we have been trained, that come from our culture, our family of origin, our religion, and our personality, which is like your survival kit in this world, has all put us in a place where we have learned how to operate. We've been taught, we've been told, and we've embodied it deep. This is how I'm going to live my day. This is who I am. This is what I'm here to do. And we embody it deeply, and it's universally flawed. Of course it is, because we learned it from universally flawed people. So once you start examining that, it's going to be uncomfortable for every single one of us. When I have and notice what's the subconscious tape they talk about, the story and the tape and your real beliefs and thoughts are all playing in the background, but you don't hear them. When some of these thoughts come forward that are like misogynistic, or, I'll just say like the white supremacy that's in our culture, sometimes these thoughts come and I'm like, where the hell did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I grew up in a feminist family. I grew up hearing these messages from the time I was a little kid. And then every once in a while, I'll notice a misogynistic thought in my head. I'm like, where did this come from? It's out there. So even myself, who considers myself independent and strong and confident, I have so much work to do to continue to be the me that I see. Because when I'm in meditation and I imagine what it would feel like to be me without any fear, without any jealousy, without any resentment, simply just living in my fullness, it feels amazing, but there's a gap between who she is and who I am. And it just kind of goes like this. But none of us is there. We're all healing and detoxing from these old beliefs. And you're right. I mean, whether we're kidding ourselves or whatever, I just think it's really important to give ourselves permission to say, I'm still an amazing person on a healing journey, but to be honest about where I have internalized messages I don't want anymore. And the biggest thing I always say is you just notice them. You just notice them as they pop up and go, oh, I've got that in me. I don't want that in me, but at least I noticed it. But instead of it like running me.
That's one of the biggest things for kind of finding your way out of this conditioning that we're all under. Is what was really hard for me is to not turn on myself and beat myself up for, okay, well, you wasted your life, on all this crap that isn't true or whatever. But to honor myself and say, I was really trying, and it came from a good place. I have always loved whatever God is. From the time I can remember being very little, I believed in something. I had a great love for it. I was very afraid of it, didn't think I was good enough for it. Part of that was the training and the religion I was in mesh, whatever it was. But I always did have this feeling, and I always wanted to get closer to it, to know it more, whatever it was. And so I had to say that to myself, because it's so easy to beat ourselves up. And then we're just kind of continuing a really unhealthy cycle. So to say, I did that. I don't know how else to navigate this except with mercy and grace from a divine source I can't name or explain, but I just know exists, because I have had moments of, I don't even know, embodying it embodying me, whatever it is. So I know there's something. I would never try to explain it, and maybe it's different for everybody. I don't know, but what hill I will die on is this source is complete, unconditional love and acceptance. There is no judgment. It requires nothing. It didn't put us here to sacrifice, suffer, and earn our way back to these pearly gates of heaven. I mean, we just have to really examine these stories and see, do they really make logical sense? Or is it a way to keep us controllable and keeping the pockets of those in charge full of gold coins in their castles and towns and whatever else they own? But so the hand over the heart thing, you know, I always say that makes such a big difference. When that comes up, the worst thing to do is push it back down, because I believe when these things come up, it's our inside saying, you're strong enough now to really look at this. Let's stop
Ah,
burying it. Let's stop dragging
yes.
it around like an anvil around our ankles. Now look at this. Look at it. Cry over it if you need to. Write it down. We've talked about this
Mhm.
before. Burn it up, whatever you have to do, but invite in the grace of whatever it is that created us. I didn't create myself. For anyone to believe that there's nothing always astonishes me, because what you and I and everyone listening started as little specks smaller than the head of a pin. And
Mhm.
everything we are was in that. We didn't
Mhm.
have to do anything except feed and water ourselves. That's all we have to do. Our bodies heal themselves, they grow themselves, they grow hair, they lose hair. All kinds of things happen without any conscious effort on our part. So there is some kind of divine intelligence that is beyond our human comprehension. That's one thing. So this divine intelligence certainly, I believe, would be encouraging and applauding, as we evolve closer and closer to a truth of why we're actually here and what that thing, being, source is. Covering your heart and saying, I hear you. I'm not going to stuff you down. My daughter is on an amazing journey right now. She traveled halfway across the world to live and work for a month in a very holy site to try and get some answers to some things. And she was struggling with something, and I said, well, this is what helps me. Put your hand over your heart, and instead of anticipating everything negative, say, thank you that this worked out so wonderfully. Thank you that my trip was blah blah. And she goes, well, who am I saying that to though? And I said, to you. You're saying it to yourself. You're consoling yourself, because we beat ourselves up for most of our lives. Now we want to be someone who can console ourselves and allow ourselves to feel what we need to feel, and then also to invite grace in to do what we can't do, name or explain. I wouldn't even try to, because it's different for all of us, and I think it's an ever evolving process. But I do think authenticity is the most important. I think catching ourselves. Why do I feel bad when I do something good for myself? Does this come from a place of truth, or is this just my programming and
Programming. Yeah.
conditioning that I'm believing? And those are steps that we can take to kind of evolve and release all these messages and teachings and everything else that we carry around that really weighs our spirit down and does not allow it to soar. As it that sounds like a greeting card, but it doesn't really allow it to become what we're here to become.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think in any circumstance, whether we're questioning a belief or wondering, where does this belief come from? Is this true? What about this of God? Da da da. If it isn't the most compassionate, gracious, most merciful, and wise response, then it's not of God.
Mhm.
If you think about yourself in a situation like, oh, I wasted my time, or in this, what's the most gracious, non-judgmental, loving, mature response to that? You were doing the best you can.
Mhm.
And now you're in a new place. Just rejoice that you got yourself to this new place and you're still going. Good for you. That's loving. That's gracious. And that's how we learn, really. You don't learn under judgment. You don't learn under this. You might perform or behave a certain way, but you're not learning and growing. So why would God be that way? If we're here to blossom and we're here to learn and we're here to grow and God loves us, then God must be the most enlightened, mature, loving, empathetic, merciful, gracious being in the universe.
Amen, sister. You said a mouthful right there. You know, one thing that I think also really helps is saying out loud what's happening, that you
Mm,
recognize it. I remember the first time someone told me this, years ago. I went to an in treatment facility to heal some sexual trauma, and I was there, and as usual, I didn't like the way certain things were run. So I felt it was important that I brought this up to whoever was running this thing that had been going for years before I got there. But anyway, I rallied all the other people that were there. I was like, I don't think this is right. Do you think this is right? Blah, blah, blah. So anyway, brought it up to the whoever was in charge, and they changed whatever it was. I can't remember at this point. They changed how it was done. And so when they told me, Mary, we're going to, we decided that isn't the best way to do it. We're going to do it this way. I had a therapy appointment that afternoon with my therapist, and I said to her, I go, okay, so I wanted this to happen for like the past 2 weeks that I've been here, and it happened, but I feel really bad now, like really guilty. And she said, I'll never forget this. She goes, oh, when that happens, I say to myself, oh, this is the guilt I always feel when I get what I want. And I just say, oh yeah, I feel you. You're just a habit, but you're not the truth. And that's it. So she just names it. And I think that all the time, like if I make a choice, especially with my kids, even though they're grown now, still, when your kids want you to do something and you can't, or would prefer to do something else and you say no, at least for me, still have all that guilt. And I have to say, this is the guilt I feel when I choose what I want over what someone else wants. It's not bad or wrong. It's just the way I've been trained to believe about myself. And that really does help.
Yes, that's amazing. And I think it's so good for us to continue to hear stories about how when you have, and I'll just speak to women, when you have women who are healing, who are finding their own agency and their own voice, and they're sharing like the bright soul gifts within themselves, and they have good, healthy boundaries, they're happier, they can do more, and they're better energy to be around it. And it just keeps rippling out. It again serves no one to have 9 billion people on this planet suffering and traumatized and being hurt and hurting. It does nothing. We need healed people, and healed people have grace and love and boundaries. And it's going to be uncomfortable because the rest of the world is still suffering. But if we have the courage to at least do it for ourselves, maybe too, we can be an example for someone else and help free them and wake them up from their suffering coma. And that could just spread a little bit more.
Amen. Especially for the generations coming after us. I think why these young people are so angry, aside from all this craziness that's going on, but we haven't done it. What are we doing to change the way things have been done, the way genders have been trained to believe this is natural for them? It's not natural. It's normal now. We've normalized it, but it's not how we naturally need to be. So I would say, especially as a woman, as a mother, as a female in this society, whether it's your nieces, nephews, sons, daughters, whatever it is, think about, do I want to continue the roles males and females have been playing on this planet for centuries, or do I want to stop it? Now, in the short run, if I behave the way my children want me to behave, my son, daughter, whoever it is, it's easier in the short run, because then I don't have to deal with them, and they'll be okay. Everybody's happy except me, of course, but I'm the martyr, so it's my job to not be the happy one. But that's the short run. Now, in the long run, what would be best and happiest for my children is to change this model of what a mother and a woman looks like, and say, my happiness is actually important. And yes, I know you don't like that I'm at school or at work when you want me to do this for you, but this is really important because I'm a human being with a soul and a spirit, and I have contributions to make, and they're just as important as anybody else's. That's something that, as they witness, the daughters, the sons, the nieces and nephews, that's what will change. And that's why we need each other as women to say, I know, isn't it hard? It's such an awful feeling. It's such a twist in the gut when you go against the grain of what we've been trained a good mother is, a good woman is, a good employee is. And we stand up for ourselves and say, I want to change. And And when we falter, just look around at this world and say, has what we've been doing made a peaceful, happy society?
Right.
A peaceful, happy world full of well taken care of people who wake up in joy and love each other.
Right.
It hasn't. So how about we start trying something different? And another hill I'll die on, I have tons of hills, is it's up to us. It's up to women. Men, yes, we need their cooperation. We need our allies, but we are the ones that are really the catalyst for this change. So ask yourself, do I want to continue the way things are? And there are, you see them all in the news, you see them in Congress, these women that have internalized the patriarchy so deeply, they are fighting to keep it going. Again, I'll do Gloria Steinem's quote, one of the greatest quotes. She says, women are the only group of people who are willing participants in their own discrimination. Let's stop that. Yeah. Let's stop participating in our own discrimination, our own pain, our own martyrdom, and start believing, helping each other to believe and come to the awareness that we're actually worthy souls and we have a right to happiness and prosperity and health and a wonderful life as much as everybody else. There's no God that put you here to sacrifice your life for other people. That would be a really horrible God. It would be a horrible person. I'm a parent. I have a son and a daughter. I would never ask my daughter to sacrifice her life for my son. I wouldn't say, you're here to serve Joey, Katie, so you do whatever Joey wants. He's the leader because he's the male. I would never do that. So let's stop doing that in general. Yes. Let's help each other turn this tide.
That's right. There's nothing holy about our suffering. So let's find the true holiness.
Amen. Inside. All right, Siri, I think we got it all figured out once again.
We do once again.
Thank you so much for joining us. I always enjoy our talks, and hopefully, you know, my biggest thing is I just want women to start asking questions. I want them to start questioning what we're told is the truth and what God wants us to be and do, and stop comparing ourselves with each other and start uniting our hearts and minds, because when women unite, watch out. That's when the change happens.
Yep.
All right. Till next time. Thanks so much, Siri.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.